I was 7 years old, and the memory of it down to the last detail is etched in. I was sleeping next to my mom and happened to wake up in the middle of the night to see a little boy dressed in a white shirt and blue shorts, similar to a typical uniform of primary school boys, enter the room. It didn't quite faze me at the point for some reason, but made me wonder who this could be. My first thought was that it was my cousin of the same age, but he wasn't even in the same city. The boy came in and walked towards the wall on the left side of the room. Towards the top of that wall was a Jesus picture, the modern-day white Jesus type, and to the left was a suitcase, on the top of which was my favorite stuffed teddy. The boy stood next to the suitcase and seemed to stare at the Jesus picture above him, so I could see his back. I woke up my mom and was pointing to the boy. I asked her who the boy was. She said no one was there. That was when it hit me. I screamed and pretty much had the entire house up, my sisters and my grandparents. I was wailing away in fear, trying to convince my mother the boy was right there and I could still see him. My mother then asked me to close my eyes for a while and check again, which I did. He was still there and my wailing and screaming continued. Then she said she'd pray for me, which she did. After maybe a couple minutes, I'd check again and the boy was gone. At one point, I seem to remember seeing something whitish dripping off the boy's face, but that bit is quite hazy. It's difficult to say whether it was a hallucination or what. The whole ordeal lasted for at least 15 minutes, while I was up and continued to see the boy throughout the entire thing. Let me start by saying I come from a deeply religious family where we never spoke about the paranormal. That being said, I have had many different experiences in my life that cannot be explained. Before my husband and I moved, we were in a newer townhouse and we're only the second or third tenants. There were several times I had seen different things on even experienced voices. My stepson even would tell us that his friend Charlie came to visit at night. One night when it was just my husband and I at home, we were together talking in bed, and I started to hear a quiet whistle like a song. I had asked my husband if he could hear it, but he had suggested that it was just the wind. About 5 minutes later, we had continued our conversation, and I had a blinding pain in my head come out of nowhere. At that moment, my husband then heard the whistling. We both stopped and looked at each other, only for the whistling to stop and the sound of footsteps pounding up our hallway stairs. My husband ran outside our bedroom, but there was nobody there. My sudden headache went away. Normally, I wouldn't think it was a nightmare. Both my husband and I heard the whistling, the footsteps, and the pain. When my mother heard about what happened a few weeks later, during a family dinner, she pulled me aside to let me know that I needed to be careful, because I had always been sensitive to the other side. Needless to say, this specific experience has always stuck with me. Hello all. My grandpa built a house about 45 to 46 years ago, and I have been living there since I was born. I am 30 years old now. We got several paranormal events there that we don't have any answer for those. I was a child around 8 to 9 years old. I was in my room and I was looking for duct tape. I was sure that I had put it on my side, but it was not there. I was looking and suddenly it rolled off to me from nowhere. Sometimes we find our clean clothes in the closet dirty, sometimes yellow drops on them. A few years ago, it was 2 a.m. and I was still working with my PC. The curtain of my room had a curtain tie with wooden ends. Suddenly, it hit to the heater next to the curtain in a hard way, like someone hit the heater with the curtain tie like a whip. It was so weird. A few years ago, it was 9 a.m. I woke up and went to the bathroom. It was 5 a.m. I woke up and went to the bathroom. When I came out, I saw a very strange blue light that was coming from the living room. My mom was there asleep on the sofa. I went further and saw another white light coming from the kitchen. I thought my father or brother was there to grab a glass of water, but I saw a shiny white light spear, almost the size of a basketball, flying in the middle of the room and then just disappeared really quickly. Whatever it was, it saw me and ran away. Once my mom and dad were sitting in the living room and someone said, "Baba," and I was passing there, and they asked me if I called them, and I said no. Last year, I was alone in the house. I slept in my room, and someone knocked on my door. Like I said, I was alone. A few days ago, something hit the window, and we checked quickly, but nothing was there. There is a long wall around our house, and no one can come in. If you wonder why I'm still living there, I should say that this is my house, and others are not welcome. I just don't want to give it up. I should have no fear in my own home. I did not buy it for someone else to run me away from it, like a horror movie. I got another strange event when I was serving in the army, but I'll share that in a different post. Thanks for listening. I'm 26 now. When I was 12 years old, my family had a paranormal experience that to this day I cannot rationalize. In my head, I feel like this was a prank, but there were so many things that happened that I can't explain. And why would 8 adults prank a 12-year-old well into 3 to 4 a.m. in the morning? Since this happened 14 years ago, I don't remember every detail. So a few transitions are missing from memory. Bear with me, and I'll do the best I can to explain it. At the time, my mom and I lived with my aunt and her 2 sons, E and D. E had his girlfriend, Cass, over for the weekend, and D had his best friend, KP, and KP's girlfriend, C, over for the weekend. Along with all of us, we had my great-grandmother with us for the weekend. We call her Mama. We had a full house, to say the least. We were all in the living room talking paranormal topics already. It's a very common topic in my family, as I've been told most of us born with a veil over our eyes, which I'm not 100% sure what it means. From context, I've gathered it means we can see ghosts and are sensitive to paranormal things. My mom says, who slept in the living room on the couch, said that she sleeps facing the back of the couch because she sees things if she does. We asked her what she sees, and she said that she sees faces in the curtains over the windows, and she sees shadows on the ceilings. That's when Cass says that she too sees things, but it's when she closes her eyes. I think cool. She's like a psychic. Cass tells us that when she closes her eyes, she'll get flashes of pictures, but only when she's at our house. We asked her what she sees, and she closes her eyes to tell us. Now, here's where things start to really happen. I'll remind you, this was 14 years ago. I was 12. It was midnight, and I was terrified. I don't remember how we started doing these things. I just remember them happening and being so scared, and they have stuck with me ever since. The one last thing I have to tell you is that in my family we say there's a way to see if a ghost, spirit, paranormal thing, being, has good or bad intentions. If you're confronted with such things, you simply ask them in the name of Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, what do you want? And if it has good intentions, it will give you a sign, or speak to you, or you'll get some type of answer from it. But if it has bad intentions, it will vanish or disappear or leave you alone. It's sort of a temporary banishment, and it will give you time to sort some shit out or give you a breather to think of your next steps. In the living room, Cass was sitting in the big, overstuffed armchair that was big enough for 2 people. My mom was sitting on the arm of the chair, and E was sitting on the other arm. Cass closes her eyes to tell us what she sees. My mom grabs her hand and looks straight ahead, unmoving. We're all confused because Cass opens her eyes and looks at my mom. She's not moving. She's frozen. I'm so confused because I don't know what's going on. Then I see my mom's lips start to tremble and tears slide down her cheek, and I become scared. My mom doesn't cry out of nowhere. I've only seen my mom cry a handful of times. And to see her unmoving, crying, not speaking, I say to the room, "Someone say it." No one moves. No one speaks. I say it louder. Louder. "Someone say it." It snaps my aunt out of her stupor, and she looks at my mom with intention and says with sternness, "In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost, what do you want?" My mom collapses into Cass's arms and sobs. My mom cries, and we asked her what happened. All she can say is she doesn't know. She couldn't move. She was frozen. We hear Dee gasp from the couch. We look over, and he's covered in scratches on his back and his chest. Now we were all staring at my mom. No one knows how those scratches appeared, but they were there. Big, red, angry scratch marks. Suddenly I hear big, heavy footsteps running down our wooden porch steps outside. I look out the window, but no one's there. We live in the middle of farmland, and the closest house was probably half a mile up the road from us. And this certain porch had a street light that would shine over it. If someone was running away, you would see them for a good 50 yards because of the street light. But there wasn't anyone there. No one running, no one standing there, nothing to explain the sounds, pounding steps we heard. Again, I don't remember why it did. But the next thing I remember happening was my mom, Cass, and KP holding hands in a seance kind of way. Cass had her eyes closed, KP and my mom just sitting there looking at her, and she begins to tell us a story. The story she tells us begins with a husband and a wife. The husband was a very mean man who beat his wife, and the wife had many miscarriages because of it. There was a farmhand, a nice farmhand, who the wife fell in love with. The husband found out, then shot them both, and then himself. When Cass tells us the last line, KP starts to scream, in a very deep voice that didn't seem to be his own. He screams, "You are not safe. You need to leave. Get out. Get out." His face is red, and I can see the strains in his neck as he screams this. He has spit flying from his mouth. I run. I run outside. Out the front door. I stand outside in the dark and take shaky breaths until I realize that I heard those pounding footsteps from outside, and outside now as well. I hurry back inside to see what seemed safer than being outside alone. When I get back inside, KP is on his hands and knees vomiting and gasping for breath, but seems to be back to his normal self. After things have seemed to calm down, we all sit in the living room together, not speaking, waiting for the next thing to happen. By this point, it's 3 a.m. I'm sitting in the floor covered in a blanket, and I fall asleep. When I wake up again, everyone is still in the living room, awake, not saying anything. It's 6 a.m. I asked if anything else had happened, and they tell me nothing else happened, and to go to my room and go back to bed, that it was over. The next day, we called a priestess, a woman from our church, to come and bless the house and asked her how to never have this happen again. She told us to devote our lives to God and to rid anything in our lives that could invite the devil in, meaning our music, TV shows, our way of thinking, anything that was not related to God, or something that could be related to devil worship, needed to change. We did none of that and never had a paranormal experience in that house again. As I said before, there's so many things in this story that seems like a prank. That's the only way I can rationalize what happened. But then who made the footsteps sounds outside? The thing that happened to KP? How can you force yourself into straining and changing your voice like that? And to do it so hard, it cause yourself to vomit. Whether this was a prank or a real paranormal experience, I'm not sure. But it happened, and I'm terrified and I'm stuck with this for many years. I have many more stories from my family members if you'd like to hear them. They'd be secondhand stories, though. But I never told anyone this story. My family members have never spoken of this to anyone else as far as I know. They've never had a ha-ha moment or a gotcha moment and revealed it as a prank to me. I do not know what it was that happened that night, but I know I was terrified and traumatized. I live in an apartment complex with 3 units. I'm on the second floor with my neighbor on the other side and a neighbor below. I never had anything happen in this place until my next door neighbor started having a really bad mental episode. I know she struggles with depression and probably BPD. I got to the point where the police kicked her door down for a wellness check. The first experience during this time, I was with friends making dinner when I sat on the couch with my ear pressed against the cushion. While sitting looking at my friends, I started hearing breathing from the cushion. I immediately got up and looked. When I mentioned this to my friend, she said, "Yeah, I didn't want to say anything, but all night I felt like something was watching me." Fast forward a little, and I was going to my bedroom once and feeling a bit creeped out, and I said out loud, "If there's anything in here, can you make yourself known? But don't break anything, please." And that night, while I was in bed, I heard a giant thud against my wall where the bathroom is. My heart was racing. I shot up and checked, and it wasn't my roommate. It was nothing I could see. This was all very brief and pretty much went away after my neighbor got involuntary committed for a while. She came back and was normal, happy, and I have not had issues since then. These two events coincided, and I think her negative, vulnerable mental state invited bad energy or something. Not sure if anyone else has similar brief hauntings, but I wanted to share this just in case. I bought my home 4 years ago and have had a lot of strange things happen while living here. I'm in my 40s, and I never had any paranormal experiences before moving into this house. I have had a lot of lights turning on and off, sinks turning on by themselves, full blast, the vacuum turning on by itself, items disappearing and reappearing, paintings started swinging on the wall, music randomly playing from all the speakers in my home at once. These are the examples. Even the HVAC guy who recently worked on my furnace asked me if my house was haunted because he witnessed things turn on and move on their own. Earlier today, I dropped an earring on the floor. I watched as it dropped and hit the floor. I saw it on the floor. I bent down to pick it up, but it disappeared. It wasn't there. It was there for 1 second and gone the next. I looked all around for it. I got a flashlight, moved furniture that was sort of nearby, and looked underneath. I even got a broom and swept the area trying to find it, but it was gone. It literally disappeared into thin air right in front of me. I felt like I was going crazy. I left the house and went on a long walk to clear my head. I came back, looked for it some more, and again couldn't find it. I then said out loud, "Very funny, you made your point. Just let me find it before I go crazy." I then had an urge to look at a specific place for it and found it. There's no possible way I could have gotten where I found it from where I dropped it. For the record, I do live alone, and no one else was at my house today. I encountered a silhouette one night. What happened was I was sleeping and suddenly woke up from a pretty weird dream. As soon as I opened my eyes, I saw a black silhouette standing on the balcony from the window. The thing is, all my family used to share the same room for sleeping. Sometimes my mom would wander outside on the balcony if she couldn't sleep. However, this night was different. As soon as I turned back, I saw my mom was sleeping at her place, and so was everyone else. Then I was like, if everyone's here sleeping, what the heck was that? I had zero courage to look back to the window and just slept an hour overthinking about it. After a few hours, I woke up and there was nobody at all. Then I got out of my bed and tried to evaluate if it was the curtains causing the illusion. But the place that the entity was standing, perfectly centered to the window, there was no way the curtain would have caused this illusion. To this day, I can't get it out of my mind. and this clip reminded me how real that thing was. And this was no sleep paralysis for sure, as I could move and had full control over my body. This place is not known to be haunted, nor are there any deaths associated with it, as far as I know. It's open to the public and maintained, so not an oozy, cold, and dark ruin. I was standing in a hallway outside of a telephony museum room. My friends were still poking around inside the Cold War bunker. I was looking at the blueprint map of the facility in the wall opposite the door to the room with a fluorescent light above me that had just went out. None of the many other lights in the corridor were out. Every one of them were working fine. I chalked that down to a random failure. A few moments later, most of my friends exited the museum, but one stopped at the doorway, noticing a hole in the floor beside the door, and suggested I come and take a look. So I re-entered the room to investigate it with them. The door closed behind me, and we were all alone. Just as we were about to peer down the hole, a woman's scream came from behind us in a corner of the room that was filled with old 50s to 60s technology and floor-to-ceiling high cabinets full of wires. Nowhere for anyone to hide. All fully lit, so no dark spaces. We both heard the scream. Both looked around towards the source at that same time. Now, there was a video running on a TV explaining the uses of the tech in the room. A typical monotone instructional archive type deal. But I cannot see why they'd have a random scream in a portion of the video that was explaining how the telephones worked. In other rooms, they do show films of old public information reels. There is some screaming in those, but you can't hear them from outside their designated areas. And certainly not in the room we were in. I've been in the bunker twice before. Never heard this scream, nor had a light turn off above me. This did freak us out a bit. The rest of the group didn't really think much of it as we explained what had just experienced, and the friend that was with me does not entertain any notion of ghosts or spirits, etc. I tried looking this up online, but I cannot find any related articles. I have dreams where the deceased communicate with me, and my roommate has the deceased actually communicating with her through dreams and in her head. We both are very sensitive to that type of stuff. I keep seeing a shadow figure walk across our dining room. This went on for about 3 weeks. I kept thinking I was crazy or hallucinating. The last time I was so prevalent that I asked my roommate, "Have you been having any weird things happening at the house?" She smiled and asked, "What?" She had been seeing the same thing as me, without me telling her anything about what I'd been seeing, and also felt she was maybe going crazy. We both felt like it was a man, and you could see a full body shadow of him. Now that we've talked about it, neither of us have seen it since. Why would that be? This isn't our first paranormal experiences. This is the first time something stopped showing itself once we talked about it. Do they just want to be known? Is there a reason behind it? I had some really weird things happen today that I cannot explain. My girlfriend and I were playing with our kids in the living room. They were playing with dress-up clothes and costume jewelry. Her son had a pair of earrings and started walking around with them in his hands, and he dropped it once. My girlfriend said that it fell in slow motion, then just vanished without making a sound. We spent 10 minutes looking all over the house for it, but couldn't find it. It eventually showed up in plain sight a few feet away from where it originally fell. Her son was holding the other earring the whole time, and my daughter never had either of them at any point. We have no idea how it got there. Then later in the day, my girlfriend took her son upstairs for a bath. We have an electric toothbrush cleaner that's mounted to the mirror. Everyone else was either on the back porch or on the first floor when she texted me that the toothbrush cleaner turned on by itself. None of this kind of activity started happening until today. Last week, I did bring in a box with some of my memories and keepsakes, including things that belonged to my grandfather who died about 5 years ago. I have one of his hats, a locket with his picture, and a necklace containing some of his ashes. My grandpa was a very friendly man and loved to play tricks and jokes on people. I was also his favorite grandchild. Was this a glitch in the Matrix? Or my grandfather just saying hello from the other side? Hills and Hollows is a scout camp in Denton, Texas. It's next to Rose Lawn Cemetery, which always made a great setup for campfire stories. I was at a camp out, and we decided to play Capture the Flag at night. I was an older scout, so I decided to wear all of my dark clothes and creep around to the other side by going deep into the forest and circling around to the other side. I walked down a hill and was about to begin my descent into the pitch-black third-degree forest. I heard a footstep close to me, so I jumped into a bush to hide. I was completely covered with green and no one could see me. I heard steps around me like people walking from the forest. I was keeping my head down, stay hidden. I heard more footsteps. They were around me now. I looked up and said, "Okay, you got me." Then I looked around, and that's when I realized no one was there. It was just me. That's when I said, "That's it," and ran up the hill and got out of there really fast. Edit. Some people have proposed that it could have been an animal of some sort. Of all the guesses, no one has come up with a possible natural answer to this story. In my experience, there is an animal that I could have heard. I challenge the skeptics out there to try to decide what animal it could have been based on these clues. It was a sound like steps. There were individual movements. I had a good view of the terrain with 40+ minutes of night vision, and I saw nothing big moving that close to me. I was next to the tree and was hiding in a bush. There were some low briar patches around. The sounds were very close. I definitely heard something but didn't see anything. And it wasn't a scurry. It was a sound that would stop and start. This was in North Texas. So this just happened to me about 2 hours ago. So I'm gonna write this out while it's still fresh. About 3 weeks and 1 day ago, there was an unaliving at my uni campus. Apparently they had jumped from the top floor to the basement area, a lower part of the building that's open to air. Now, I had already woken up that day feeling dread in the air. Ever since I was little, I felt as if I was connected to spirits and ghosts more than others. But I digress. That's a story from another time. Anyways, last night, or the past 3 hours or so, I decided that I would take some pics of campus when it was dark out. I'm not sure why, but I couldn't and still can't sleep. So I figured as well take some creepy or liminal pics. So I went out and took the pictures. But then I decided to go to this building where the incident happened. As soon as I went down the stairs to the lower area, I immediately felt unsafe and as if I was being watched. Something definitely felt off, so I tried to take some quick shots and just to get out. I took about 4 pictures on the leftmost side of the area, then moved to the center part. As soon as I raise my phone to take the picture, I hear something behind me, which sounded like a rustling or a small crack. I pause, and I try to filter the sound out by not acknowledging it. Not 1 second later, I hear a tremendous and loud crunch from my left behind me side. I've never been so frozen in fear in my life. I don't even think, and I start walking to the right, as there were stairs there too. I quickly ran up those stairs, then looked back, debating with myself if I should check it out or not. I decided to briefly investigate, so I went near where I thought the sound came from, peered over the railing, and saw nothing. I also felt it important to mention that there is nothing in the basement area that could be capable of making such a noise. I'm back in my dorm now, and out of morbid curiosity, I researched what a body sounds like when it hits the ground. Lo and behold, a loud crunching popping sound. So yeah, I'm not getting any sleep tonight, and I would definitely never go back to anywhere near that building. What do y'all think it was? Once I was driving downtown Tulsa, heading home around 2ish at night. I had come to the point where there was no exits for a good ways, with no one on the road but me in another grayish-black car. I got to the point where I was going to pass this person eventually. They were all over the road, and they finally got into the right lane, and I passed. It was a strange-looking car with black tinted windows, and just looked odd for some reason. As I passed, their brights came on, and they continued to stay somewhat close. Then all of a sudden, as I was looking down the road, nothing was behind me. No lights, no car, no nothing. No exits in this stretch of road at all. I cannot believe this car had disappeared after it was literally right in my ass and then vanished. I remember thinking I had literally gone mad for a moment there, but I just continued home. Can visiting graveyards cause a haunting? Are woodlice insects of an omen? Bit of context. For past few years, I've been going to visit local cemeteries. This past year, me and my other half have made it a point to visit new locations. We go to places that have basically been forgotten about to offer company and tidy any mess we find. We always try to respect, but now I'm worried I brought something home. After one of our first trips together, I came back home, and during discussing our day with my big sister, a huge wood lice fell from thin air. Surely it couldn't have been on the ceiling. From this day to now, I've stopped seeing them everywhere I go. I know this sounds crazy, but I feel like I've given myself some sort of curse. Yes, it's natural to see them crawling about graveyards, but I don't think they should follow you. It doesn't matter if I'm in the middle of a jungle city or it's the middle of the day. They'll find a way to make an appearance. They've managed to get into my house, and I see them more and more now. One was crawling towards me last night when the lights were still on. To top it off, my partner has just moved into a homeless accommodation. His house is at a very top of the flat. It's concrete flooring. And can you guess what has already made its first appearance? Is it an omen, and what can we do? Weird spooky stuff. The last time I've stayed in the flat, I've heard footsteps up the stairs, and then something strange has happened. First was to do with the heating, so that doesn't bother me as much. But the other night I was sitting in the living room, heard footsteps, then watched the carrier bag across from me being crushed as if someone was holding it and squeezing it. I'm used to spooky stuff. I've got my own ghosty friend. She's called Rhonda. Make it less scary. I don't know if she's chucking woodlice at me, but so far she just moves pens and my lighter anytime I need them. It's just really freaking me out. See comments. I've attached a photo that we took. It's blurry, and I'm not claiming it's 100% anything serious, We took this in the graveyard. I was wanting a photo of the trees to try and draw. Hardly a great reference, but we were drunk. Didn't see the pic till the next day, but doesn't it almost look like someone standing, leaning over the wall? That bit of grass is a mass unmarked burial spot. Came here hoping anyone could share similar experiences or give some insight. I took a trip to stay in a cabin in the middle of the woods, high up in the mountains of the big city of Ranger, Georgia, USA. This neighborhood was 30 minutes up the mountains, away from civilization, and even the cabins were spread far apart. The front deck of the cabin was completely exposed to the woods, so I acknowledge that any animals could stroll along if they pleased. But I stayed there for about a week. Me and my boyfriend sat outside on the front deck every night, very late, and at no point felt in danger. It was peaceful, with fireflies out and sounds of crickets every night. Until the 5th night, it was eerily dark too. The sun was covered heavily. It was about midnight, and all of a sudden, I didn't feel peace like I did those other nights. The forest went completely quiet, and I felt a horrible sense of dread. I genuinely feared for my life. I sat there in my chair, looking out into the dark forest, trying to rationalize and calm myself down, that it was just my mind playing tricks. But all of a sudden, my boyfriend said out loud that he felt unsafe. That when I realized it wasn't just me. We then both heard a blood-curdling scream, and we pulled out a flashlight to see what it was. Turns out it was a gray fox. They make scary screaming sounds. The weird part was that the fox was running, and its ears and tail down like it was scared. This was in June, and I read that foxes scream like that when it's mating season or they're in danger. Their mating season is in winter, and this happened in June. So I do believe this fox was in danger or afraid as well, adding to our fear. The cabin was 3 floors, and we were able to climb out the window and sit on the roof because we wanted to still be outside and relax. Didn't matter how high up, I still felt something truly evil and stayed inside. The only other time I felt something so evil or like someone was watching was when I had a few paranormal experiences at a haunted house. Georgia really doesn't get mountain lions that often. Maybe a bear, but it didn't feel that way at all. It felt unnatural. I recently joined this sub as I have always had interest in the paranormal world. I believe spirits exist, human and inhuman, but what I'm about to say happened with me. June 30th, 2014, in India. My dad had been in the ICU for nearly a month in a semi-conscious vegetative state owing to tubercular meningitis. It was a private hospital, and so it became very difficult to continue with the treatment for financial reasons. And the doctors there had told us there was no hope either. At that point, we decided to shift him to a renowned government hospital and had to go through a lot of hassles to get him not only admitted to the hospital, but directly into the ICU. So on this very day, we were all set up to move him from the private hospital to the government one. The hospital discharge formalities took several hours, and by the time my dad was put into an ambulance for the shift, it was evening, and it started to pour rain very heavily. My sister and a cousin accompanied my dad in the ambulance, and me, with my uncle, followed them in a car. After traveling for about 45 minutes, there came a junction which usually had heavy traffic jam, and we decided to let the ambulance go in that direction, as cops would let the ambulance pass anyway, and once they get past that signal, it would be a relatively quick drive to the hospital. Me and my uncle took a U-turn to take a different and a slightly longer route, which would have less traffic so that we could reach the hospital before or at the same time as the ambulance. After taking the U-turn, we continued down the road, and there I saw her, an old lady standing almost at the middle of the road. Skin was as white as paper. She was wearing a white sari and was holding a thick walking stick. It looked more like a branch of a tree, staring in the direction where the ambulance went. She didn't have an umbrella with her, and all the shops were closed because of the rising level of the water in the street. The water had risen to the point where our driver couldn't take his foot off the accelerator, lest the water might seep in through the exhaust. Me and my uncle both saw her, but didn't talk about the experience until a couple days later. My dad had passed away on July 13th. To this day, it still baffles me. What was the lady doing amidst torrential rain in the middle of the road, holding something like a branch of a tree? And I have never ever seen someone having such a pale and white skin. What do y'all think? I, 25 female, have always been more in tune with the supernatural. My first memorable experience I just so happened to witness with my cousin. When we were much younger, my cousin, let's call her Kay, and I went to a birthday party for one of my older cousins, let's call her Kat. It was a gorgeous day in June, and it was the perfect day to enjoy a nice summer breeze. My cousin Kat was having her party for her 12th birthday at the Duncan Park. While this park had its usual picnic tables and playground equipment, it was surrounded by weeping willows, which aren't that uncommon to find in this part of Mississippi. However, unlike other parks, this one was sitting right next to an old plantation house, an abandoned YMCA that closed down in the 70s. In the front of the old locomotive that the city was forced to fence off because my aunt had defaced it in her youth. My cousin Kay and I ran around the park while waiting for the rest of my family to show up to enjoy the festivities. That's when we saw them. 2 women dressed up in pastel, lacy dresses with bell skirts and bonnets, the style resembling that of the Civil War era. However, in our 7 to 8-year-old brains, they were dressed like Barbie princesses. So we followed, as we still had that child naivety when it came to stranger danger. They walked up the steps to the front porch of the Greek Revival-style home, where we saw a few men in tailcoats, adorned with top hats, and what looked to be the afternoon tea set up on a table. My cousin and I watched at a distance, at first completely entranced by the scene in front of us. It was like something out of a fairy tale. We got a bit closer. Then I remember we were going to ask them something. What we were going to ask, though, I don't remember. I do remember that as soon as the word "hey" came out of our mouths, the ladies in the dresses and the gentlemen in the suits stopped what they were doing and floated through the walls of the house, disappearing completely. My cousin and I stood there and looked at each other for a few minutes in disbelief at what we had just witnessed. Kay and I came to a silent understanding that no one would believe us since we were just children, and would be written off as having our overactive imaginations. We went back to Kat's party like everything was normal and didn't utter a word of what just happened to anyone. Fast forward to when we were teens, we finally told my mom what we had experienced all those years ago. My mom told us that the Auburn plantation had reenactments in the spring, so what we must have seen was former residents enjoying the summer breeze like they were still amongst the living. I was visiting my mother, and I do not know if that was paranormal or not, but it was. In any case, it began so that we both have argued strongly and I then ran as a very stupid 15-year-old boy in anger in a nearby forest, and after then relatively calmed down. I went a bit deeper and explored a bit of the environment because I was rarely there and wanted to look around. When I then took some paths, I came to a place where I thought I had seen someone. I go closer to it and look at the person and saw that the person is chained to a tree and wears an orange construction worker vest. I felt like shit, of course. I thought it was a real person. And see, while I ran away, that there was more people hung on the trees. I ran back home and told my mother. Even if she did not dare at first, I could somehow persuade her to go there. And when we were back, I was no longer alone. It took a little more time and noticed that the life-size replicas of people were there, and they even put clothes under the construction vests to make them look more real. This was the most creepy experience in my life. I grew up in Athens, Georgia. When I was about 15, my mom had a friend move to Macon, who she would visit occasionally. It's like 2 or 3 hour drive south. One weekend, she took my sister with her. And on the way back, they told me they saw a woman with a little boy run out into the road in front of the car, hold up her hand, and looked at them, then just vanished. My mom is a nut and one of those people who tells you she sees spirits, so I didn't really believe them at all. Then several years later, my girlfriend, who at the point had never met my mom or sister, told me the exact same story, except she was on her way back from a band trip, sitting in the back of the bus, looking out the window at the same road. She saw a lady and kid run into the road and then disappear. You can imagine my shock, I'm sure. I guess I'm just wondering if there are other people out there who have seen this event happen. I was not a witness to this. As a matter of fact, ever since they told me about it, if I travel that road at night, it really freaked me out. 441 is a well-traveled road. Surely someone else has seen this. Pretty sure it's close to the Eagle Rock area. Thanks for reading this. I feel like ghosts are following me in Japan. Since I was a kid, I know that there are ghosts around me, but this time it really creeped me out. So I've been traveling in Japan with my family for about 10 days now, and I have seen ghosts multiple times while traveling. But late last night, when I was about to sleep, the air conditioner at my hotel kept making weird voices, and my mom, who was asleep with me, she woke up so easily. And I didn't even move. But maybe it was because of the air conditioner, because it was so loud. I almost couldn't sleep because it scared me so bad. The next morning, I tried to sleep at the train, but while I was sleeping, I felt like someone was trying to block me from breathing. I couldn't wake up. Also, my mom saw me untie my hair, but I always have my hair tied up. Last night, my brother said I kept making weird noises when I slept, but I never done that. I always sleep with my mom while traveling, and I always sleep with my mom while traveling, never alone. It was something I never did. So I think there's something following me and trying to strangle me and make it where I can't sleep. What do you guys think? Sorry for my bad English. I was always a skeptic. This is how it started. My spouse and I went to Sedona, Arizona. We walked on a hiking trail. She was in front of me, and I heard a weird sounding female voice mumbling briefly. It sounded like, phenomenon. I asked my wife if that was her, and she said no. Then she asked if it was me, and I said no. A day later, we were in our hotel, laying in bed, and we both randomly heard the same similar brief voice. Feminine. I asked if that was her. She said no again, and she thought it was me. My wife also mentioned staying at the hotel for 4 nights. Every night she had some kind of lucid nightmare. I had an awful nightmare too for one night. We left Sedona after 4 days and traveled across the U.S. for 20 days with no paranormal experiences until we went to Phoenix, Arizona the night before flying out. The wife and I again were laying on the bed and heard the same woman voice with the weird mumble. Since then, we've never heard the voice again, and it's been over 6 months. What the fuck was it? I was hanging out with my friend at his house around 9 to 10 p.m. when he watched the door handle go down and the door opened 6 inches. And by that time he got up and checked like there was nothing there. I already knew there was some kind of entity in his house. So I decided to say, if there are any paranormal entities or ghosts, make your presence known. As we sat silently waiting for a response, I didn't expect to get one. Not even 2 seconds later, though, it sounded like someone was scratching on the door for dear life. To this day, I can't recreate the scratching I heard. The whole room went cold. My body was full of fear, and then the temp went back to normal, and the scratching stopped. My friend immediately got up and opened the door, searched all around, but found nothing. Fast forward a couple nights. I also happen to live a couple houses down from my friends, and I'm lying in bed, wide awake on the 2nd story, trying to fall asleep when I hear 2 knocks on my window. So like every human, I ran outside with a weapon, but no one was outside. How my house is designed, nothing could have possibly hit my window. Even a human couldn't get up there. A couple nights after this, yet again, at nighttime, this took place. I'm in my living room when I hear what I assume is the entity from a horror movie scream in my neighborhood. The type of scream that sends chills down your spine. Fast forward a couple nights later or something. I'm not good with dates. I'm in my garage chilling when I hear the entity I assume another horror movie scream. Super loud right outside my garage. I sprinted up the stairs so fast my lungs hurt so bad from going so fast. The knocking, the scratching, and screaming were all terrifying. I should also add, I have no mental illnesses, and my friend was there to witness the scratching after I called the entity out. This is going to be a bit of a lengthy post, so bear with me. I live in an apartment in Pennsylvania. The building is over 100 years old, and it's right next to a funeral home. I've been here and never had any strange experience up until the last couple of weeks. I should also note I have a child that lives with me half the time, and the other half she's with her mom. On my night while I was drifting off to sleep, I started feeling onset of sleep paralysis. All my limbs were going stiff, and I started to feel pinned down. Luckily, I was able to snap myself out of it, the closest thing to ground myself, which was my phone. I was able to sleep fine after that. Then maybe a week later, my daughter is asleep in her room, which connects to my bedroom through a doorway that sits directly across from my bed. I woke up and saw the silhouette of a child standing against the wall next to the door frame for where my daughter's room would be. It was just the black mass darker than the room with no face or limbs or hair, and it just stood there like it was staring at me. Her door was still closed, and the figure was on the side that would be covered by the door if it were open. I was definitely freaked out, but chose to ignore it, turned my gaze away from it, and went back to sleep. When I woke up again, a couple hours later, it was gone like nothing ever happened. Fast forward a few days, my girlfriend and I are at a flea market and I run into a medium selling her wares and talking to people. I told her what I was experiencing and she looked concerned and told me to cleanse my apartment by burning sage. She also gave me a small vial of holy oil to put on my front entrance to keep bad spirits away. She also wanted me to put some on my daughter's forehead to protect her. The next day, my girlfriend and I go to the apartment and do the cleanse. While I was cleansing a room, my girlfriend was waiting in the kitchen, which is next to the front door. My girlfriend and I suddenly both hear the door slam itself shut. We actually saw it happen. But after that, my apartment has felt more peaceful and I no longer get a bad vibe. I do plan on moving out ASAP though for different reasons. When I was around 8 years old, my parents were renting out this house. It was a very nice one-story house at the time, as we lived there for about 3 years. We were not living in a very good time, however. Today, looking back at the memories in that house, it was definitely haunted. My mother even admits it to this day that something wasn't right in that house. I have multiple crazy instances in that house and how sketchy that place was. Multiple toys turned on in the middle of the night by themselves. I remember all the toys that turned on to this day. One of the toys was an old music box that was my great-grandma's, and the other was a Christmas puppy that would sing up on the housetop. Looking back as a kid, those things never bothered me. For some reason, I couldn't sleep in my room, ever. Another time I experienced some weird crap was when I was asleep. My mom and dad were out in the back having a drink, and my sister, who was about 2 at the time, was being watched by my parents while she was playing with her toys inside. The door was shut. My sister started to cry for some reason, eventually started choking on her saliva, not in a harmful way, and my parents couldn't seem to get the sliding door opened. Well, that was because the wooden stick that was lodged in the door was down in the crevice. We used the wood stick every night just in case anyone tried to intrude or break in. The thing is, we don't know how the stick got in the door. My sister was playing the whole time nowhere near the end of the door. My parents were freaking out. Went to the side of the house and started pounding on my bedroom window. I could not wake up. They were pounding for a good solid 2 minutes with loud bangs. I am a very light sleeper and always have been. I'll wake up to a quiet alarm easily. I think I had some sort of energy around me to where I couldn't hear anything. They had to break a window with a chair to get her and unlock the door. But that wasn't the scariest thing that happened. I had 2 cousins over, and they were sleeping in my room. I had a trundle bed, or however you say it. We slept with the door closed and fell asleep to some cartoons. By this time, we're all asleep, and I hear a loud bang coming from my door that woke me up instantly. What I woke up to next is the scariest things I have ever seen or been through to this day. Standing in the middle of my door was an angry brunette woman in a white dress. It was the angriest face I have ever seen. I was screaming for my parents and shut my eyes for a few seconds, hoping she would leave, and she did. I ended up crying and sleeping in my parents' room that night. Now, I don't know if it was a real dream or not. The door was opened. I closed it before going to sleep. If it was a dream, then it would have been the realest dream. I remember the setting perfectly. She was literally in my doorway in my room, and everything was the same. It was horrifying. Me personally, I don't think it was a dream. That house had something evil in there. Does anyone have answers for what exactly this could be? It wasn't an animal or cat. It woke my mom up, but she was wide awake when it was happening and not hallucinating, etc. When she heard hissing from inside her closet like something was trying to get out. Her son that lives with her also says he always hears knocking at night. The closet's doors are mirrors. Mirrors and closets are said to be portals. The house in the area does have some history. The area was part of an old town that was totally destroyed by a tornado in the 1800s. And her son also saw a full-body apparition of a man sitting on his bed. This happened many years ago. Does anyone know what this could be? My first thought was a demon, but looking for more in-depth explanations or type of demon entities, etc. Any and all answers and suggestions are very, very much appreciated. Edit. When I said my first thought was a demon, I mean if it's paranormal. Obviously, we're checking for animals and checking for pipe. My first literal thought was a demon. People on Reddit are mostly just vile human beings, but I very much appreciate the few sincere comments. Thanks. I don't know much about this guy, and I don't know if this man is good, bad, or neutral. My sister just told me about this a couple of days ago, and I wanted to post here to see if anyone knows anything. My sister a decade ago said she started to see a man in a top hat in her mirror at night sometimes. No face, all black, definitely a man with a top hat. Around this time, she was playing with Ouija boards, not closing them out, experimenting with drugs, psychedelics, and coke and weed, and being just reckless. She told me she'd see him at night in the mirror, especially on her bad nights. To this day, she says she still sees him, although she's moved now 4 to 5 times. It only takes a bit before she starts seeing him in the mirror at night. My sister also hasn't had any improvement in her life. It's actually much worse. Was a decade ago, unfortunately. She also told me she was having a sleepover with one of her female friends once, a few years ago, who got up to pee, and she said she saw him in the mirror, but thought it was a dream. My question is, does anyone know anything about this man or have any experience with him? I found out I'm not the only one who has saw a lady in my dad's house. So, my dad's family aren't even believers. They're all strong Catholics, mostly. But almost everyone in the house admits they've heard or saw something in the house. Most of us conclude that it's possibly the spirits of my grandparents, who both died in the home and whose ashes are spread in the garden on a rose bush. This is fine. I've also experienced odd or creepy things and have since I was young. Some things I can't explain and some things I fully admit was probably just something else. But when I was in my preteens and younger, I would sleep on my cousin's bedroom floor. My dad stays with my aunt. The bedroom faces a long hallway which leads to stairs. Occasionally, I'd wake up in the night and see what I always thought was a short lady in a long dress holding a tray. All she does is walk downstairs. That's all. I loved horror and ghost shows when I was younger and always just assumed it was my brain regurgitating info I had heard on my TV. Earlier this year, me and that same cousin echoes floor I'd slept on for years found out after doing a bit of Googling that the block of the houses my dad's places on, the land used to be a factory or something like that. Anyway, last night rolled around and ghosts came into convo between me and my cousin and her boyfriend after he had mentioned seeing and hearing things in the nursing home. I mentioned as a joke I used to think I'd see a lady walk down our stairs, and my cousin looked at me, and her eyes widened and she stood up. She started saying how she always saw it too, and she swears to God sometimes she would see her at the bottom of the stairs also. I'm not really thinking anything deeper of it. Just thought it was cool that I'm not the only person who had saw the same woman.